Today, on this episode of The Crossover, we will be discussing the best-selling book, Anti-Cancer Living, with integrative medicine experts Lorenzo Cohen and Allison Jeffries. Learn how you can reduce your cancer risk and support treatment by focusing on 6 key areas of health and wellness. Much more on this episode of The Crossover. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be talking with Lorenzo Cohen and Allison Jeffries regarding anti-cancer living. Should be a good one.
Hey there, good morning.
Hey, Lorenzo, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good morning.
I'm all right. Good to see you guys. Hey, Allison, how's everything?
Great, thank you.
Well, it's great to have you guys on. I'm going to do a brief introduction of you both just while everyone's logging on. Again, thanks for joining us. We have the privilege of speaking with Lorenzo Cohen and Allison Jeffries this morning, both world-renowned integrative medicine and wellness experts. You'll hear all about it today. Lorenzo is professor of clinical cancer prevention and director of the integrative medicine program at MD Anderson. Lorenzo is also a founding member and past president of the International Society for Integrative Oncology. Allison has degrees in both art history and education, as well as a master's degree in educational psychology. Allison received her undergraduate degree from the University of British Columbia, her teaching degree from Queen's University, and her master's from the University of Houston. Allison is passionate about educating the public regarding healthy living and lifestyle factors that influence cancer outcomes. They have a best-selling book called Anti-Cancer Living. They make quite the power couple, as you'll see. Very impressive, and here to discuss their book, which is truly revolutionary. Again, thanks, guys, for joining us. Very excited to speak to you both.
Thanks for having us.
So, I guess we'll just start with the basics. What was your impetus to write this book? I mean, you guys are both heavily involved in the field. What made you put this book together?
Well, I guess that we really wanted to share with the lay public the information, the research behind cancer and lifestyle. And, with Lorenzo working at MD Anderson and coming home and talking about the fascinating research that was going on in this area, conducting some of it, colleagues, people around the world. We realized as we were starting our young family that we had this vast information, a lot of information that we could use to help raise our children. And so we started doing all kinds of things with our kids and health, all around health and lifestyle. And then we realized we weren't doing it. And so we started to take that on as well, and started giving lectures and workshops, and just realized that we had a perspective that we hoped others would be interested in.
And what's interesting about cancer is that most people, certainly within our friend group, did not know that the majority of cancers could be prevented. And then when I talked to my surgeon, med-onc, rad-onc colleagues at MD Anderson, they too were actually somewhat unaware of this, vast literature showing the link between lifestyle and cancer. So, within heart disease, people think, oh yeah, how I lead my life matters, but cancer predestined, and that's not true.
So that's a very important point. I just want to get some background for all of our listeners. Number one, is the incidence of cancer rising in this country? And two, what percentage of cancers can be prevented or at least modified by lifestyle changes?
Well, one of the challenges with cancer, and we talk about it as a disease, is it's not one disease. Heart disease, it is, there's maybe a few subtypes, but it's primarily one disease. There's over 100 different cancers. So incidence of cancer increasing. Overall, it may be flat or a slight increase, but if you look at some subsets like colorectal cancer, thyroid cancer, melanoma, there is a precipitous increase. It's quite shocking. Between there was an article that was just published actually about just 2 weeks ago. Between the ages of 15 and 39, cancers are increasing dramatically. And the take-home message there was it's primarily around lifestyle. Why does this very steep increase in thyroid cancer is uncertain. Likely it's linked with environmental factors, hormone disruptors, etc. It's estimated that, for certain cancers, at least 70% could be prevented with lifestyle intervention.
Wow.
For example, endometrial cancer, about 50% of colorectal cancer, diet, exercise, obesity. Overall, it's thought it's at least 50% of cancers and cancer-related deaths, because these same factors are relevant once you are diagnosed with cancer to improve your outcomes.
I mean, that's amazing. So nearly 70%, I think, just like you said, people do not realize the impact of their lifestyle on cancer risk. Let's get right into your book. You guys talk about the mix of 6. What exactly is that?
These are 6 areas that we've identified that relate to lifestyle that can really have an impact. And we start with love and support. We move to stress, sleep, exercise, diet, and exposure to environmental toxins. And we put them in this order for a reason, because we believe that, if you want to launch into lifestyle change, whether you're a person who has a cancer diagnosis, you're a caregiver, you're somebody who just wants to make change in your life, that you have to start with social support, because it's the critical linchpin that allows you to move forward with success. And we are our best experts on what is going to work for us, and getting, your team together is a critical first step.
And the other thing you guys emphasize, everyone's going to say, oh, well, it's just 6 things, but you really focus on the synergy between these 6 things, and how the power of all of these combined is way more than just adding them together. Describe what that synergy means to you guys.
So the challenge when you go to this literature, and I empathize with my physician colleagues, is if you look at the literature, for example, on diet and reducing the risk of getting cancer and improving outcomes afterwards, most of the research is done reductionistically, meaning we'll compare this group versus that group on diet or on exercise. And the findings are actually somewhat modest. The epidemiological data is overwhelming, but we know that association does not mean causation. When you look deeper at some of this research, you see that it is the people who are modifying diet and exercise that have better outcomes. And in fact, there was a paper I just reviewed that was published this week showing that diet alone and exercise alone did not modify all-cause mortality that much. It was really the combination of the two, a healthy diet, we can get into what that means, and exercise combined is really, and so that is synergy, and it's more than just the additive effect, that they complement each other and result in a better outcome than if you were to just add them.
And if you think about synergy, we all have plenty of examples of going to bed late, sleeping poorly, waking up, skipping exercise, eating comfort food.
Negative synergy.
So you build this negative synergy. And what you really want to do is create a positive contagion, where you sleep well, you get up refreshed, and you have the energy to engage in, healthy eating, healthy stress management, and healthy exercise.
A good example of negative synergy from the biological perspective is that, a lot of listeners and a lot of people, to improve their health, believe appropriately that losing weight is going to be helpful. And so they restrict calories and they exercise more, and they don't think about their sleep. And there's clear evidence saying that sleep loss, restricted sleep time, changes our metabolism, changes the way we process and metabolize food. So if you are shortchanging yourself on sleep, regardless of what you do with diet and exercise, you're going to have a propensity to turn those calories into fat more than if you were to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, I mean, it really is about getting your day started well, like you're talking about. That positive momentum definitely builds on itself, and, vice versa. Negative momentum can also just really deter you. Let's get into those mixes of 6. I really want to get into that. And you guys were talking about, number 1, social support. What is the physiologic basis for having, for the effect of solid social support leading to anti-cancer living? What are the 3 biggest tips you guys have, and what's the evidence for it?
Well, so the merging field of connection, love, and on the flip side, loneliness is quite profound now. There is clear evidence, and you know, people try and equate this from a perspective of health and well-being that people would understand. It's estimated that being in a state of loneliness and isolated is equivalent to your health of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that kind of puts it into context, and the research is quite clear all the way down to gene expression, gene behavior, which of course controls the aspects of our biology that allow us to be resilient to internal processes like mutated cells that ultimately could cause cancer, inflammation, immune function. It's all associated with loneliness. So the flip side, of course, is love and connection, feeling that you're part of something beyond yourself, contributing to the world. So there's a clear biology here, what we would call the direct effect of connection and support. And then there's what would be considered this more indirect effect.
So some of the three things that you could think about if you're looking to make change in this area. Number one, I talked a little bit about building this team. You know, before you step forward to lifestyle change, you know, set yourself up for success. So make sure you have in place a group of people who are going to support you, and not just your significant other, because they can't do everything. And if you are somebody caring for a cancer patient, then what you really want to do is make sure you have your own team, and that person also has their own team, so that you can both be supported and the family can be supported. So build your team, and then, you know, reflect on what are the things that really matter to you in your life. You know, so often we don't connect the change that we want to make to the person that we are, the person that we want to be. And so taking some time to really just spend 2 minutes writing down what's important to me in my life, and does this change support that I want to make. And then something as simple, like Lorenzo was talking about, this support, you know, volunteering. If you're somebody who has cancer, texting a friend has been shown to be really important for both people involved. A short text, this is research that's just come out. Also, you know, volunteering if you can. If you can step out and engage somebody that you know to say, let's go and do something once a month, or I can knit something during the day, you know, finding an opportunity to give back. Because often if you're in a situation where you're dealing with cancer, you've got lots of people giving to you, and it's really important to receive that as well, with, you know, love and support, and take that energy that's being given to you. But also there are small things you can do to give back.
I mean, what an underappreciated or you know, I mean, I guess there's not enough focus on the support networks around patients with cancer, and also the importance of your social network for actually preventing cancer. I think that truly is something that people need to focus more on. Let's go to the second mix of 6 here. Diet, obviously such an important part of people's lifestyle. Give us 3 of the most important dietary tips for people who are trying to live a healthier lifestyle, anti-cancer living.
I think that we need to incorporate more vegetables into how we're eating. And so make half of your plate vegetables, and not just salad, lettuce leaves. Actually look and see when you're formulating your meal, what are the vegetables that I can make to cover it. Make one that's labor intensive and one that's not, and make enough that you have leftovers. The second thing we would suggest, and these are all things that you hopefully will tweak to make your own, because that's really the most important takeaway from what we're saying today, is that these aren't the things to do. It's only the thing to do if it works for you. Another suggestion is that to have something in your fridge every day that you can make a plant-based lunch or dinner from. So for instance, what we do all the time is we have coleslaw that we make with red and white cabbage, carrots, green onions, cilantro. And we make a big, huge bowl of it, and we don't dress it. And then we take handfuls of that and add a can of beans, some nuts, more vegetable left over. And there you have a full meal that only requires work, once a week to make. And you can have it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So those,
Interesting. Now, sorry, go
yeah,
on.
no, go on.
I was going to say, what do you guys, what's the data or the research evidence based on fats and proteins? Obviously, vegetables with all the vitamins, the fiber, but what about proteins and fats? What do you guys recommend with that in terms of diets?
Well, you know, the other thing, just from the bigger perspective, and then I'll get to that quickly, is that you shouldn't think about diet as a diet. And, you know, if you are going into this saying, I'm going to try this diet, think twice. And just think about restructuring your plate and your approach to food. And that leads into, you know, fats and this whole craze of paleo and keto. We need to have a balanced plate. There was a study that was just published, small study, but quite compelling, out of Stanford, that compared keto against the Mediterranean. And for those who don't know, keto is essentially 80% of calories from fat. So a super low carb diet with the goal of shedding pounds. It's not really sustainable. It's really hard to lead that kind of diet. There are certain medical conditions for which it could be very useful, refractory epilepsy being one of them, in particular in kids. But it's not sustainable, and the results from cardiometabolic factors were quite similar between the two diets from a clinical trial, but the micronutrient content was essentially devoid in the ketogenic diet, because 80% of your calories are coming from fat. So you didn't have that variety of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients. We want to be exposed to the variety of the phytochemicals that primarily come from the plant world. Not to say that you need to be vegan or vegetarian, but that the majority of your plate needs to come from the plant-based world. And we know that that's critical also for our microbiome. And, you know, this is an emerging field, and I'm guessing if you haven't already had, you will have somebody to address that topic on your show, because the microbiome is linked with all aspects of health and well-being. And I'll use that term because there's a link between the microbiome and mental health, depression, etc. In the cancer world, there's no question there's a link between the microbiome and risk of cancer, and data that we published just at the end of last year in Science, showing a clear link between the microbiome response to immunotherapy, and the people who had the best response to immunotherapy had the highest amount of fiber in their diet. And fiber, soluble fibers in particular, come from plant-based foods. So it's a balance. And, you know, if you were to think of a diet, it's in some sense these indigenous diets, the Mediterranean diet being one of them, but, you know, the indigenous, the Central South American diet, the Asian diet, it is, you know, the characteristics are very similar. There's some animal protein, there's a lot of plants and fiber, and there's some fats. So it's all necessary in an appropriate balance. And whole food is key. So people don't need to be scared of carbs. You need to be scared of refined carbs, and go out there and have variety, because the data on microbiome is high diversity is healthy.
And I was going to add that, you know, when you're cooking for a group of people, whether it's your family or your community, you often sort of start cooking because you're worried that somebody doesn't like this and somebody doesn't like that. And so we encourage people to cook new things. And when we were raising our kids, I heard a wonderful woman on the radio. I don't know who she was, but she said, you don't give up on a food until you've given it to somebody 15 times. And
in
so
different ways.
In different ways. And so I just kept presenting it. I mean, sometimes there's allergies and that's something different, but generally, you know, after 15 times in different ways, you're okay with it.
Top 3 foods to avoid.
Well, anything processed, probably.
Yeah, the ultra processed foods are.
But, you know, we're really about not what to avoid, but actually what to include. because if you tell people that they can't have it, then immediately you want it. And so it's much better to say, what do I want to include more of in my diet? What is my diet lacking that I can bring in that's healthy? And when you do that, it actually just moves that stuff out. And so then you can treat yourself to something that you would like that's not healthy. But that generally you're just including more and more. Sugar would be the one thing.
Try and avoid added sugars in any food, including, hidden in things like tomato sauce. Buy the one that doesn't have the added sugar.
That's right.
Read your labels.
You really have to read your labels.
Got you. Now going on to the third pillar of the mix of 6, stress. We obviously all have to deal with it no matter what you're doing for a living. Such an important part of everyone's life, and anyone who tells you that they're not feeling stress, obviously I don't know what they're doing all day, because life is stressful by nature. Give us your top 3 stress management tips.
Well, stress is something that you have to address. It's not something like exercise where you could do it, while you're doing something else. So stress, you really need to dedicate time to. But I think that we write about how important it was in our family. While our kids were growing up, we established time to meditate each day, for as little as 2 minutes to as much as 10 or 11 minutes. So I think that it's really finding that person. I think you need a team, one of your team to help you in this area, and for you to decide what you want to do. With Lorenzo and I, we did MBSR together, mindfulness-based stress reduction course for 8 weeks. I just felt that I needed something more to add to our ability to manage stress. And so we did it together. And that really helped us establish a practice. There's a wonderful Headspace on Netflix has a kind of a program that goes through different kinds of meditations. And it's a wonderful thing. We've done it with our kids during COVID, just a way to spend time together, actually doing something that will benefit you. So,
and we do live in a stressful world, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't manage it. Yeah. So, the body is built to respond to stress. And in fact, evolutionarily speaking, I suggest that we have evolved from people who had the most sensitive, exquisite stress response, at least from the acute perspective, because it allows you to get out of danger. That fight or flight response is good. It's healthy. It's when that becomes chronic that it is quite damaging, harmful, increases actually your risk of multiple diseases and leads to worse outcomes, certainly after diagnosis of cancer, but also other non-communicable diseases, heart disease, Alzheimer's, etc. Because it activates this fight or flight response, your body is flooded with stress hormones, leading to inflammation, decreased immune function, etc. The data is extremely alarming on the harms of chronic stress. But the flip side is there are things that we can do about it. Ideally, when you learn some of these practices of meditation, relaxation, calming this fight or flight response, because the majority of time you don't need to be engaging in a fight or flight response, that the more your brain goes into that relaxed state, the more you're able to activate it in the moments that are really challenging in your life. But it's a practice, and the brain needs to get used to that, because our propensity is to be really good at the stress response because it helped us evolve to where we are today. So to be good at it, so to speak, it does take practice. But in even a 10-minute period of time, and I know that everyone is saying, I don't have time to relax and to meditate, too much is happening. Some would argue you don't have time not to have time, because it's going to shorten your overall life if you don't. But it doesn't take that long. And I know that everyone listening has at least 10 minutes in their day that they toil away on social media or some other things that they could fill with something that is helping you with health and resilience.
And often we don't even recognize kind of where our bodies are with stress. And so I encourage everybody, after, moving on to the next thing in your day, take 3 deep breaths and check in, belly breaths slowly. And what you'll find is that you'll really be able to sense where you are. And if you set a timer or sort of an alarm every 2 hours just to do that, it really helps you learn what's happening in your body and then what potential steps you might need to take.
That may sound relatively trite, but there is a biology behind that. The vagus nerve is innervated underneath the diaphragm, and the vagus nerve leads to increased parasympathetic tone, the opposite of the stress response. So by extending the diaphragm down with deep diaphragmatic breaths, you're stimulating parasympathetic tone, which is the relaxation response. And when it comes to negative synergy, nothing is worse than chronic stress in our lives. It is, as we say in anti-cancer living, the saboteur of all healthy intentions. There is no way that you're going to stay on that healthy diet, have a good relationship, get a good night's sleep, and be motivated to exercise if you are chronically stressed all the time, flooding your body with stress hormones.
I mean, like both you guys said it great. It's very difficult to avoid stress because life is inherently stressful, but knowing how to manage it, knowing your own body and taking those, like you said, 10 minutes a day, not a lot to ask for, to just kind of reboot, reset, I think is absolutely critical. Now going on to the 4th pillar of the mix of 6, we'll talk about sleep. You guys mentioned it earlier, how critical it is. I think the new evidence is now showing exactly how important it is and that it's absolutely critical for overall health and wellness. Give us your top 3 sleep habit kind of tips moving forward.
Well, routine. Routine is where you need to evaluate. Obviously, you might need to back up further. If you feel that you have a sleep disorder, it's really important to go and see a sleep expert to have that evaluated. And one sleep expert said that that is an issue that reoccurs for 3 months, maybe 3 times a week at least. And so if you're in that camp, then you would want to consult with a physician. But if you think that your sleep issues might just be related to sleep hygiene, and for most of us that is the case. And so we talk about using the senses to evaluate where you might need to improve. So thinking about, feeling the temperature in your room, hearing, what are you hearing outside of your room? Do you need earplugs? Do you have a snorer beside you? So using your senses to evaluate. Also thinking about, taste is one of these, but it really, it's important to speak about it because people, a lot of people are unaware how long caffeine stays in the body. And caffeine stays in your body for up to 24 to 36 hours after you drink it. And so it's really important that if you're sensitive, that you're paying attention to that. Things like, alcohol, chocolate, sugar at night really impact the way in which you sleep. So using your senses and making sure that you're establishing that routine and paying attention to really the part of sleep, what you're putting into your body before.
And there are a lot of, tried and true gold standard strategies from the behavioral perspective, such as cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia in particular, CBTI. And this is actually, covered by most individuals' health insurance. The challenge with sleep medications is that there is no sleep medication that will get you into deep sleep stages 3 or 4. They will allow you to fall asleep because they're drugging you, but they don't give you literally a restful night's sleep. So from the psychological side, you feel like you had a good night's sleep because you were asleep for 6 to 8 hours, but it wasn't therapeutically helpful from a health perspective. So CBTI, which incorporates a lot of the things Allison just mentioned, behavioral strategies, cognitive strategies, is really the gold standard people should look into.
How much sleep should we be getting? Is there a magic number, or Some people can survive on 3. I mean, what does the data show about brain function and overall health?
Well, my graduate school advisor, said he's fine on 4 hours of sleep, and I don't think he was fine on 4 hours of sleep a night, but that's the way he led his, unfortunately, short life. The data is pretty clear, and it comes from massive population studies around the world for decades. 6.5 hours is the minimum. And there's actually a flip side, in some sense, independent of disease, but it may reflect underlying disease, no more than 9.5 hours. So that's a pretty big window. I know personally, I'm pretty good on 7.5 hours. I know that's not good enough for Allison. She needs, 8 or 8.5, and feels great in that window. So there will be individual difference, but definitely no more than 6.5, and you probably don't need more than 9.
And if you have any teenagers or kids in the house, it's really important. The National Sleep Foundation has a great website, and they outline what kids should be getting per night. And, with teenagers, you really have to push to make sure that they are getting the required number of hours. And that is, 8 to 9.5, you can actually see your child when, how they're benefiting from having the required number of hours.
We haven't talked about the statistics of our society, but we are a nation that is sleep deprived, and it's going to create that negative synergy and be, unfortunate for our overall health.
Yeah, no, it's definitely that combined with the stress, like you said, everything starts to spiral. Getting into the 5th pillar of the mix of 6, exercise, a very confusing topic for most because there's so many different exercise routines, weights, cardio, high reps, low reps, once a week, 7 days a week. Give us your 3 biggest exercise tips for someone who wants to do anti-cancer living.
Well, I'm going to start with one that might not seem like a tip in this way, in the way in which you framed it. But, it's the summertime, a lot of us are gathering with friends and family. This is the time to shift away from food to exercise and activity. And so when you start building events around, walking in the park, exploring a new, animal habitat, so shifting away from food and to things that you can do as groups. I also think that, and we've spoken about this many times, that if you're somebody who's very active, then you don't need a Fitbit or a smartwatch or something to monitor, how active you are. But this tool continues to be incredibly effective at letting you know how active are you in the day. Well, do you want to set a goal of 1,000 more steps a day? So keeping your body moving, and Lorenzo will talk about some of the science around that. And, this is where you bring a member of your team on board and you say, do you want to meet each week to walk? It's not so much, there are different levels. So the first thing is getting out the door and walking and moving more. Then there's the strength training and the aerobic activity. So it's really about just increasing slowly and taking small steps, but gathering your team together to help you do that.
And like diet, in some sense, the industry wants us to be confused as to what to do to keep you, getting a new product, getting a new app, getting a new piece of equipment. The data is quite clear that, at least in the world of cancer, and everything we've been talking about actually applies to cardiovascular disease, diabetes. There isn't a different, let's say, mix of 6 for the other non-communicable diseases, but of course, we focused on cancer. Minimum of 30 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous physical activity, and ideally, you are doing this across the course of the day. So there's clear evidence that, the person who hits the gym for an hour is better than somebody who doesn't go to the gym. But the person who hits the gym for an hour and then is not sedentary for the majority of their day has better outcomes, however that be defined, certainly cancer survival is one of them, than the person who hits the gym and is then sedentary all day. So sedentary behavior is now clearly an independent risk factor, independent of how active you are throughout your day. And, for those who want to, do that 30 to 60 minutes at one time, that's fine and go for it. But then you really need to reduce sedentary behavior at other times throughout the day. Again, thinking about this from an evolutionary perspective, we have evolved from individuals who were really good at hunting and foraging, and the more able you were to be active and actually preserve calories, even when you're physically active, the higher the probability you're going to be a successful hunter-gatherer. And in fact, there is this association between, the more weight you start losing and the more physically active you are, the slower your metabolism is going to get. And again, that was, evolutionarily speaking, really good when there wasn't food on every corner. Incorporating light resistance training is important as well in terms of bone health. But it is about getting, movement and physical activity across your day, which is going to be key.
And, some of the things, I mean, when we were before COVID, and some things changed, life changed in the work world somewhat. You take the stairs instead of the elevator. You have walking meetings with somebody, which actually are very productive. You can have a pad of paper and you take down notes as you're walking about things that you're discussing. For kids at home, kids sit all day at school. So, if you have an ironing board, that is a stand-up desk. And you can lay all your stuff out there. So there are many opportunities to put it both in the workplace as well as in the home environment.
Now, what do you tell people who give you the very common excuse, which I hate to hear, but I'm too busy to work out, too busy to exercise?
Well, no, I mean, then it's like saying they're too busy to manage their stress. They're fooling themselves in some sense, because you don't have to work out. I have a stationary bike that I was using more, pre-COVID, at my desk, and it fit under my desk, and I was able to type and do email. I could work out 8 hours a day and get my work done. So there's nothing to do with, I don't have now a truck driver, and we had somebody call in. A truck driver is like, well, what am I going to do? And that is a bit more challenging when you have a job. A surgeon, if you're in the OR for 8 hours, clearly you're standing, so you have that box checked. But you need to fit it in, ideally not when you're doing other things, because that's more mindful, but it can be fit in when you're doing other things, when you're on the phone, when you're doing
it has to be a priority.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is that if you're saying to somebody, I don't have time, it means that whatever your core values are, somehow those two things have not aligned. And so you need to examine, maybe this isn't a priority for me right now, and maybe I'll focus in another area. And that is absolutely fine. It's more that you just have to acknowledge it within yourself. What's going on? Why don't I want to do this right now? Is it because I don't have support? Is it because, things around me are swirling and I don't know how to stop it? I mean, so you have to really look and say, what is the priority for me right now? If I was going to pick one of the mix of six to focus on, what do I want to do and how can I be successful making that change?
Yeah, I mean, again, you said it best. It's about making it a priority. Anything that's a priority, you're going to make time for. So as long as you put yourself and your health as a priority, then it should be something that you make time for. The final pillar of the mix of six, which is environment, give us 3 precautionary principles to ensure a healthy lifestyle. What are the 3 biggest things to avoid in your environment?
Well, I'm gonna say something and then I'll let Lorenzo jump in. With 80 to 85,000 chemicals out there, and the majority, I think maybe 7 or 8% have actually been assessed. we are sitting ducks. And so the precautionary principle is that you try not to use anything that has not been tested. And we don't all want to get a PhD in order to understand this, because it's very complicated. And so we have to do the best we can by choosing products that have been pre-vetted for us, by going to sites that we know we can trust, like EWG, Environmental Working Group. And they, evaluate all the products that are out there, and give you an assessment so you can make a choice about whether it's worth it to use this product or not. Just to look at we don't have a lot of control outside of our homes, but in our homes we can have an impact. And so, from the top of your head to the tip of your toes, every product you're using, teenager girls use, I think, over 160 products, or exposed to 160 chemicals a day. So when you start thinking and looking, and it's not that much less for, for adults. So it's really about how can I change out this product? And if you're, helping somebody who has a cancer diagnosis, this is a great area to step up as a group and help, cleaning out somebody's house with all the cleaning products, all of the top of the head to the tip of the toes. What new products can you bring somebody so that their body can focus on addressing the cancer with their treatment, instead of focusing on dealing with these added chemicals that are coming in? And so, top of the head, tip of the toes, your home environment, and looking at your water. Can you filter your water in some way? Can you filter your shower heads? And the reason to do this is, all of these products contain chemicals which interfere with your hormones, and, endocrine disruptors. So these have real impacts at a cellular level.
Yeah, EWG actually has, they've been for a number of years now doing a water project. And if you type in EWG water quality, you can zoom in on your particular neighborhood and look at all of the challenging chemicals that are found within your water system. And, the industry will say, well, it's such a small amount. Even a small amount of a carcinogen, meaning something that we know causes cancer, is not ideal to have within our drinking water or within beauty care products that we use, or within the food that we consume. The agent that makes a lot of sodas brown traditionally was something that was a carcinogen, and there was a white paper written, and a backlash against the soda industry, and their feeble response was, well, it's below the required amount and it's so small, you'd have to consume this many sodas a day to increase your risk, etc. That kind of fell on deaf ears, and by the end of that week, when this publicity came out, they agreed that they were going to eliminate this from all of their products. And this is across, of course, multiple beverage companies. So, part of this actually comes to us as a society, saying this is not okay to have endocrine disruptors and carcinogens in our food at any level, because they're typically also studied in isolation. And not in combination. It'd be impossible to do the research, look at what's the combination of these 160 chemicals that a teenager is exposed to for 10 years of her life, and then see, what the future health risks are. So the precautionary principle is what we come back to, but I think advocacy is really important and really powerful, as we saw with the people standing up against the soda industry.
Now, this is the final question, because I know you guys are in a little bit of a time crunch here, but give us your crystal ball view. What are the next big steps in our understanding of anti-cancer living? What do the next 5, 10, 20 years look like?
Well, I mean, I'm more hopeful than ever in this area, that there be, when we grew up, there wasn't much understanding about the link between excess sun exposure and risk of melanoma. I was diagnosed, coincidentally perhaps, on the day that we completed our book with an advanced melanoma. And that was from, you know, the behavior that I was engaged in as a teenager, getting multiple scorching sunburns. We've seen that change already. You know, our kids, most of them did not have the wicked sunburns that we did as children. And we see people, you know, very conscious of that in parks. Smoking rates have plummeted, albeit we allowed the tobacco industry to reinvent themselves with vaping that we know has health consequences. But that too, I believe, will eventually disappear. So this better scientific understanding and more of as society as a focus on health and well-being being a priority, I think is going to ultimately lead to decreased cancer incidence. To some degree, cancer is out of our control, but that's the minority. So if we could get rid of 50% of cancer, and again, we're going to also be getting rid of 50% or more of cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes. You know, we're going to be a healthier society overall.
And, you know, when we talk about this in anti-cancer living, you know, we're trying to provide the most up-to-date science so that people have a reliable source to go to. And then, you know, strategies that they can put into play to try and make change in their life. But ultimately, what we want is your body to function in the best possible way. And so then if you do get a cancer diagnosis, that your treatment can work in the best possible way. And that, you know, we want to be whole and content and healthy, mind, body, and spirit, in order to step forward and have, you know, a great life.
Well, listen, absolute pleasure interviewing you guys both. Lorenzo, Allison, just a terrific interview. Kudos to your book, Anti-Cancer Living. Everyone should buy it, read it. I think the take-home point is that we are all responsible for our own health, and that a lot of what we thought was out of our control actually is in our control. And your book kind of lays out 6 very distinct pillars. It's very straightforward, and I think for anyone who's motivated, it's a real terrific, life-changing, you know, modifiable activity. So again, kudos to all your hard work. Pleasure interviewing you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Good being with you today.
Take care, guys. Have a great weekend.
Bye. You too.
Bye-bye.